Hello, nerds! Nerds for Yang! We have part 2 of our human-centered capitalism State of the Union metrics. If you didn't see part 1, I'll also link below. The takeaway was that there were 3 areas that were a little problematic: in income, labor participation, and infrastructure. So part 2 is looking at Andrew Yang's campaign in terms of his specific proposals. And then we'll also look at some of the other Democratic candidates like Bernie, Biden, Buttigieg, Warren, Harris, how they compare on trying to move some of those numbers. Get right into it. With the first issue, if you'll recall, median income has basically been flat from the year 2000 to present. So it's around $60,000 in constant dollars when you adjust for inflation. So if you think about, okay, well, what's Andrew Yang going to do about that? Well, the freedom dividend is probably the biggest one. So that $12,000 a year freedom dividend for every U.S. adult citizen would do more for median income than pretty much the last 20 years of economic development in the U.S. So that's pretty huge. $12,000 a year freedom dividend. I also did another video about how would we pay for this? Link to that one below as well. So I would argue in terms of median income, Yang's UBI, Universal Basic Income / Freedom Dividend, would be like the biggest change to median income probably since, who knows, maybe since the New Deal. I'm not sure, but it would be pretty huge. But he's not the only candidate running for president in the Democratic Party. You have Biden. What would he do for median income? So I went to Biden's site. I tried to look for what would be the most specific policy proposals Biden has to address this topic. What I found was him talking about restoring the basic bargain for American workers. So he says, the American middle class built this country. Today, CEOs in Wall Street are putting profits over workers. It's time to restore the dignity of work and give workers back the power to earn what they're worth. That's a kind of generic. I'm not sure what that means. I wouldn't disagree with giving people dignity of work, but I'm not sure specifically what policies he's proposing. He also talks about education, which I think could probably help with median income. He talks about, this is really hand-wavy. Every American should have the opportunity throughout their lives to attain the skills and education and realize their full potential, starting before kindergarten all the way through a certificate program, on-the-job training, community college, 4-year degree, and everyone should have the opportunity to up their skills as rapidly as the economy changes. Yeah, they should, but how's that going to happen, Joe? So I don't think he would do as much on median income as Yang with the freedom dividend. But, I don't think Biden's candidacy is about policy. It's about, I'm not Trump. So that's what you get with Biden. He's not Trump. Now, Bernie, you gotta give credit to that guy. He has some serious proposals. He's got raise the minimum age to at least 15 an hour, universal childcare and pre-K, make sure women and men are paid the same, guaranteed paid family leave, medical leave, easier for workers to join unions, quality education, and green jobs. So, certainly probably of all those things, boosting the minimum wage to 15 an hour would likely impact the median income because it would kind of like raise everyone's wages in theory. So you got to give Bernie credit there. The next thing that we talked about in terms of the State of the Union was labor participation. And we talked about how labor participation has actually been going down pretty dramatically since the late 1990s. And as a reminder, that's where people are of a working age, but no longer in the labor market. They're not even looking. They might be on disability. They may be surviving, with help from family, but they're just not in the labor force. What would Yang do about that? So he's got a few interesting proposals, and all of these are on yang2020.com. He's up to like 105 proposals. He's clearly got the most specific action plan of any candidate. But when it comes to labor participation, some things struck me as most relevant. One was increasing funding to vocational programs within public schools. 2 was direct the Department of Education to provide materials to all public schools about career paths that don't require a college degree. If everybody went to a 4-year college, A, most of them would get jobs that don't require a 4-year college degree, and B, a lot of jobs would require very specific vocational skills that are not taught at traditional colleges. So train people not only to go to college if that's the right path for them, but also to learn skills like with your hands, like electricians and plumbers and roofers and mechanics. In fact, his third thing is prioritizing career paths that students express interest in, rather than giving them blanket advice that college is the only option for everybody. And then begin a public education campaign championing vocational jobs in education. Something like, I work with my hands and it's awesome. I think that makes a ton of sense. I feel like today, if you don't go to college, society kind of looks down on it. And the reality is the economy and the country need people with all kinds of skills. And in some cases, we'd be better off with someone who had a very specific vocational talent and expertise versus them getting a bachelor's degree in literature, and they would end up getting paid more. There are statistics that suggest half of the people with 4-year degrees are in jobs that don't require them. And then there's a lot of jobs that are unfilled because employers aren't able to find people with the right skills. Next, Elizabeth Warren on labor participation. She's got some pretty cool policies here. She talks about making sure company boards have 40% elected by the workers of the company, removing tax giveaways to rich people and giant corporations, and then introducing an ultra-millionaire tax on the 75,000 richest families that then would allow us to invest in universal childcare and big housing investment. So would Warren's proposal impact the number of people going to the labor force? Maybe. I guess universal childcare would probably help more people be able to work. Investing in housing, I don't think that would necessarily affect how many people enter the labor force, but she's got some ideas there. I don't think that would move the number on labor participation. Well, maybe the universal childcare would. Beto O'Rourke. The closest thing I could find on Beto's site was his initiative around increasing demand for small business products and services, growing the annual federal procurement from small businesses by $50 billion, ensure at least half of that increase goes to businesses owned by women. That would help. It would basically move small business procurement from $105 billion to $155 billion. In a country of 300 million people, I don't know if that $50 billion is really going to move the needle. So for Beto, seems like it's kind of nibbling around the edges, but at least Beto has something. In the past, his website almost had no policies. So that's Beto. I think when it comes to labor participation, I really like Yang's focus on vocational programs. So he even mentions that in Germany, something like 50% of adults get vocational training, and I think in the US it might only be like 5 or 6%. And then Warren, she's got the big boost in terms of getting more representation in board memberships and taxing the ultra millionaires. And then you've got Beto on small business procurement. I'd have to give the win to Yang on labor participation, but that's just my guess. You guys can decide. Next, infrastructure. So you remember in the last part one of the kind of State of the Union based on human-centered capitalism, one of the numbers was saying, hey, rather than just looking at GDP, unemployment, and stock market, what if we looked at the health of our infrastructure as a country, like, roads, bridges, airports, ports, that kind of thing? Again, U.S. is considerably lower than many other parts of the world in terms of how much we invest in our infrastructure. So Yang's proposal is a $1 trillion infrastructure investment initiative called Rebuild America over 5 years that would support 13 million jobs, generate 1.5 trillion increase in efficiency and productivity, include a series of challenge grants to include advanced materials and designs in new American structures with an emphasis on sustainability, and expand the fiber optic network to include rural areas so that more people have access to high-speed internet. That would definitely do it, $1 trillion investment, the Rebuild America initiative. I think the thing with this $1 trillion infra investment and potentially like another $1 trillion plus for the UBI, we're getting into like a pretty big price tag. So as much as I love Yang, I would imagine some of this stuff will need to be phased out over time. And maybe that's why he's saying the infra would not be trillion right away, but would be over 5 years, which kind of makes more sense, like 200 billion a year. Still a serious number. Buttigieg, I looked at his site about infrastructure, and Mayor Pete says this: freedom means building 21st century infrastructure because you're not free to pursue happiness if you don't have access to safe roads or clean water. Wants to propose a major federal investment in clean water and wastewater, transport, mobility, rural broadband, climate adaptation and resilience. No numbers, no dates. Now that said, I will give Mayor Pete credit because a few weeks ago he had zero policies. So now he at least acknowledges that we need to do more in infra. Much like the Mayor Pete candidacy, this one's even lighter than Beto on the details, but obviously it hasn't hurt Mayor Pete in the polls, so you can't give him too much crap for that. Klobuchar, she wants to boost federal investment of infra, help states and localities leverage private funds, issue Move America bonds, clean energy bonds, ensure revenues collected for maintenance of infra are used for their purpose, and pay for infra with higher corporate taxes. So you gotta give credit to Klobuchar. I think she's pretty specific on what she wants to do with infra. Probably a little stronger than Booty. So let's just summarize. We talked about three things: median income, labor participation, infrastructure. When it comes to median income, you got to give Yang the gold star just because the freedom dividend would by definition boost everybody's income by $12,000 a year. And as a reminder, the median income for an American has been flat for the last 20 years. So that would be a historic bump. Other people like Bernie in terms of raising the minimum wage, you got to give some credit. I think that would help with median income, but probably not nearly as impactful as the freedom dividend. Biden, it's not clear what he would do about median income, but he does want to restore the basic bargain for American workers and give Americans skills they need to get ahead. Very light on how he would do these things. Now, you could just say, well, I don't need to know how. We'll work that out after he gets into office. I don't know. I feel like if you're hiring someone for a job at your company, you would ask them how they're going to do things, ask for specifics. Presidency is a pretty important job, so I kind of feel like we should expect our candidates to get into the weeds. With labor participation, you've got Yang. I would give him the edge because he's so focused on vocational training, and he's basically calling BS on the traditional Democratic Party platform, which is always about free college, more college loans, more college scholarships. And the reality is the economy needs people with a variety of skills. Some of them you get in college, and then there's a lot that you actually won't get in college and you would get in a vocational school or a vocational training program and might actually be more interesting and a better fit for a lot of people. Warrant on labor participation includes taxing the ultra-rich, investing in housing, and having board memberships have more workers. So you could say, well, if there's more worker elected board members, maybe that will produce more jobs. But hers is kind of indirect. I don't know if she would really move the needle. Beto on labor participation, boosting $50 billion for small business procurement. You could argue, yeah, small businesses are the largest employer in the country, but other $50 billion probably won't really do it. Kind of small ball thinking on Beto's part, if you ask me. And then with infra, you've got Yang, $1 trillion over 5 years, fiber optic for rural. You got to give credit to Klobuchar, which is pretty much the same, except even hers, she has these new bond ideas. And she's also talking about making sure the revenues collected from infra goes back to infra. So I might give Klobuchar a slight edge over Yang in terms of the specifics of the policy. And Booty, kind of like Biden, he talks about it, but no specifics. If this video was useful to you, please subscribe, comment, let me know what you think about these policies, share the video. You can also follow me on Twitter at nerds4yang. And I also have a bunch of petitions on change.org to get Yang on 60 Minutes Hot Ones, the Hot Wings interview show. Those are opportunities for you to pitch in and help the Yang gang. See you next week. In the meantime, keep it real, nerd power all the way.